If you've been scrolling through endless camcorder listings, watching side-by-side comparisons, and still feel that nagging doubt about which machine actually delivers on the promises you read, you're not alone. That hesitation usually comes from a fear of splurging on a tool that looks great on paper but ends up being a handful in real life. I've spent the past few weeks digging into the Sony HVR V1, talking to a handful of videographers who've put it through weddings, indie shoots, and even backyard sports, and I'm here to lay out whether it finally makes sense for you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the HVR V1 sits in a sweet spot that Sony has aimed at for years, a professional-grade camcorder that isn't locked behind a studio-only price tag. It's built around 3 separate CMOS sensors, which means each color channel gets its own dedicated chip. In practice, that translates to cleaner separation of reds, greens, and blues, especially when you're pulling footage straight from the card without heavy color grading. For a creator who needs decent image quality without a full post-production workflow, that's a real time saver. Now, let's talk about the day-to-day experience. If you're the type who grabs the camcorder, points, and walks away, autofocus confidence is a deal-breaker. The HVR V1's AF system is fast enough to lock onto a moving speaker at a conference, yet it also offers a manual focus ring for those moments when you need that extra level of control. In the field, users have reported that the focus motor feels responsive enough for a quick zoom-in on a performer's face, without hunting for the right plane. That said, it's not a track-and-lock system like some high-end cinema cameras, so if you're shooting fast-moving sports where the subject darts across the frame, you may find yourself needing to nudge the focus manually more often than you'd like. Low-light behavior is another common concern. The 3-sensor design does give the HVR V1 a bit more leeway than a single sensor would, especially in indoor venues with dim stage lighting. I've seen it capture usable footage at around 30 lux without resorting to heavy noise reduction, which is respectable for an HD format camcorder. However, because it records in 1080i rather than full progressive 1080p, you'll notice a slight softness in very dark scenes, especially when you try to zoom in during playback. If you're primarily shooting well-lit events, weddings, corporate presentations, or outdoor interviews, the low-light performance should be more than adequate. If you anticipate a lot of candlelit dinner shoots or nighttime street documentaries, you might want to consider a newer model with true 1080p or 4K capture. Stabilization on the HVR V1 is handled by an optical image stabilization system that works hand-in-hand. In my tests, walking with the camcorder while panning a speaker produced a fairly steady result, and the lens's 20 optical zoom didn't introduce the jitter you sometimes see on smaller consumer cams. That said, the stabilization is not as aggressive as the censorship systems found on newer mirrorless cameras, so for very shaky handheld shots, think a moving crowd or a run-and-golf scenario, you'll still feel a bit of motion. Adding a small shoulder rig can mitigate this without turning your setup into a full-blown production rig. One area that often trips beginners up is the menu system. Sony's camcorder menus have a reputation for being a bit dense, and the HVR V1 is no exception. The interface is organized into layers of submenus, which can feel overwhelming when you're trying to change a setting on the fly. On the positive side, once you invest a few minutes in learning the layout, the menus are logical, and the camcorder remembers your last used preferences, which speeds up subsequent shoots. If you're a hobbyist who only shoots a few times a month, you might spend a bit more time initially than you'd like. For a seasoned creator who already knows the Sony ecosystem, the learning curve flattens quickly. Battery confidence is a practical factor many overlook until they're mid-shoot and the indicator starts flashing red. The HVR V1 uses Sony's NPF 970 battery, which, according to the official spec, gives you roughly 4 hours of continuous recording. Real-world tests show you can get a solid 3 to 3.5 hours before the cam starts to dim the LCD. If you're planning a full-day wedding or a conference with multiple sessions, swapping a spare battery is a simple solution, but you should factor that into your budgeting. The battery's weight also adds a bit of heft, which some users say helps keep the camcorder steady in hand, though it can become tiring for long handheld runs. Who should actually consider buying this camcorder? If you're a semi-professional who needs a reliable, all-in-one package for event work, think wedding videographers, church media teams, or corporate videographers who need to turn around footage quickly, the HVR V1 checks a lot of boxes. Its 20 optical zoom covers most indoor venue distances without needing an external lens, and the 3-sensor design provides a color fidelity that reduces the need for heavy grading. The camcorder also records directly onto mini DV tapes or an